Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about all things firearms policy, politics, culture, media, you name it. We're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. So please take a moment, like and share the program so that your friends can know where the conversation is taking place. Also, if you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And in the case of YouTube and Facebook, make sure you hit that notification button. That way, you'll get notified as soon as the program goes live, and you can participate in the live chat as the program is taking place. Also want to encourage you, please make it a point to visit fpcgear.com. That's right, it is the place to go to find all of your Pro 2A swag. I'm talking t-shirts, coffee mugs, hoodies. I'm talking tank tops, something for the significant other or ladies for yourself. Or, maybe you need something for the office or you need something for the home. Whatever it is, we've got it. Even if it's you just want to go out and you got to wear that mask for the COVID, well, guess what? We got that for you too. The best part is hey, you can send a message supporting the Second Amendment. And the best thing about all of this is, every dollar that you spend goes right back into the fight for a right to keep and bear arms, so you can support the Second Amendment and you can look good doing it. That's fpcgear.com. All right. In these times, and then over the last few years, and especially over the last few months, there's been no shortage of use of force incidents. Of things that we can look at, of incidents and videos, in fact, to go along with it. And you guys know the first thing that happens as soon as these videos hit the streets, all of a sudden everybody becomes a tactical expert. And everyone now, all of a sudden, they know exactly what folks should and should not be doing, right? What I wanted to do, was I wanted to kind of sit down and talk a little bit about, when these videos come out, when we see these incidences, what are some of the things that we need to be looking for? What are the things that we need to be aware of and conscious of that maybe we're not thinking about in a layman's eye? And once again, I'm the first to tell you, I am a layman when it comes to a lot of this stuff. The only thing that I've learned from all of this is that I don't know everything. And so I wanted to bring someone on who knows a lot more about these situations and a lot more about use of force training, whether it's civilian or law enforcement. And so with that, I want to welcome to the program Mr. Todd Fossey of Integrative Defense Strategies. Todd, how you doing today?
Awesome, Craig. Awesome to be here, man. I'm looking forward to having this conversation, as difficult as I think it's going to be. One of the it's a bit of a paradox, right? I want to just kind of come right out of the gate and say this, that there are many aspects to this conversation that is almost impossible to articulate when it comes to use of force incidents. So I'm going to do the best I can to apply my knowledge and expertise to the conversation, help shed some light on a very important topic. But right out of the gate, I'm just going to tell you, in the name of intellectual honesty, it's going to be a real challenge. So I hope everyone listening runs out the hit with us for the greater good.
Well, I think the first thing that I like about what you said is when you start talking about intellectual honesty, because here's the thing, we all have our perspective. And when we look at a situation, we have to realize we're looking at it through the lens of that perspective, what I would want to do or have happen. And the problem is that when looking at the situation, you have to look at it objectively. And being intellectually honest, sometimes, the first thing that to me, if I'm going to be intellectually honest, is I have to realize that video that I'm looking at isn't the whole story.
No, not at all. First things first. So whenever I have such a massive topic like this and I'm on a podcast or a show, I write down just a few kind of initial thoughts that I had. You try to trust those initial thoughts because it's so obtuse and it's so broad that I think it's important just to kind of create a little bit of a structure. So do you mind if I just sort of touch on some of these bullet points that I wrote down for myself, and that might help us and the audience to create it? Because it's so florid. We almost don't have anything to sink our teeth into. You know what I mean?
No, I hear you.
So the first thought that I wrote down was, Use of force incidents hardly ever meet the eye test. And what that means is very rarely do they ever turn out to be what they appear to be. The next thought is there's a lot of misinformation going on out there, and that's one of my things is I really want to encourage people to reserve all judgment and opinion and commentary until all of the evidence and the totality of the circumstance has come out. That's really important. I would also come right out and say there's also a lot of disinformation. Disinformation meaning we are being intentionally misled by the media in terms of how these incidents take place. And unfortunately, a lot of people are being educated by disinformation. Misinformation meaning it's accidental, accidental misuse or a misunderstanding, but there's the disinformation actually intentional. All right, it's propaganda. It's part of the propaganda campaign. And then there's an important aspect of this that I think everyone needs to understand, and especially in the firearms industry in general, and that's the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a psychological phenomenon where people of low knowledge or low ability suffer from what's called an illusory superiority, meaning they think they're much better and have much more knowledge and skill than they actually have. For those that aren't familiar with me and my work, I do have a deep background in psychology, neuropsychology, and human performance. So I come at this from an angle of expertise from multiple disciplines. I'm not trying to self-aggrandize. I just want people to know that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this. So that might give us a little bit to sink our teeth into moving forward. I hope that helps.
Oh no, it definitely helps because I think first of all, it's understanding all of these situations. It's the psychology of what is going on is vitally important because it plays so much into why it plays into why they do what they do. And if you understand that, if you understand the psychology behind it, then you
Yeah.
can make sure to mentally prepare yourself, to psychologically prepare yourself in the event that you wind up in one of these in a situation like this.
Yeah, heaven forbid.
Heaven forbid. Yeah.
Heaven forbid. Conflict avoidance. A lot of people are contacting me these days, and um, I just keep preaching conflict avoidance. Do everything that you can to be where the bad stuff isn't. Right. That
I
line in the sand for a lot of us hasn't been crossed yet. You know what I'm
yeah.
saying? So go ahead, Craig.
I just had to point out because I deal a lot with people who are a lot of we'll call them not supporters of the Second Amendment. I'll be polite and I'll refer to them as that. But oftentimes they think that in many of these cases they're like, oh well, people who have guns just want to go look for conflict, and I'm like, no. First of all, if someone is properly trained, the first thing every trainer I've had that I consider to be a good trainer is always focused on, like you said, conflict avoidance, making sure that number one, if there's stuff that's going to be going on, you need to be somewhere else because if there's a conflict, the outcome of that conflict can be much more harmful for individuals because you have a firearm. The other thing is even with that, even if you are in a situation where there could be a potential conflict, de-escalation has been, I mean, once again the focus on avoiding conflict. It's
Yes.
almost like the gun fu, for lack of a better term. But learning how to deal with situations by avoiding conflict is a essential part of most really good firearms training.
Well, I think any responsible gun owner or trainer is going to spend a very significant portion of their time training, literally not just discussing conflict, but literally training conflict avoidance. An intellectual understanding of how these things work is not enough, right? It's important that we're actually turning the information into application through actual practical training, physical training. And you might not think that there's an actual way to practically practice conflict avoidance, but there actually there actually is there's a whole science and methodology that can go to conflict avoidance a lot. And the over I mean almost exclusively throughout the course of my career in this, the people that I know and the people that I've trained with or trained, that will go through walls. They will go through walls to avoid conflict, right? We'll do everything in our power to avoid conflict. What we train and prepare for is that magic moment where someone else is imposing um, their malintent onto us.
Mm-hmm.
Once that happens and we have no reasonable means of retreat, depending on what jurisdiction that you're in, now that changes, right? That's a part of the training where we have to train ourselves to flip that switch
Mm-hmm.
so that we can respond in a way that is skillful and measured, right?
Right.
We're not just responding in a way that's just blind rage, right?
Right.
We're responding in a way that is skillful and measured, and we're operating within the laws governing the use of force and what's known as the use of force continuum. So not only is there the legal aspect of it to that, but there's also the tactics and the maneuvers and psychology that goes into that as well. That's it. It can be very difficult to articulate in a format like this, but I think we can lay down a foundation for people to build on for sure.
Okay. So when we see these situations, I don't think that people necessarily uh, differ in when they're looking at the situations between law enforcement use of force and civilian use of force. Are there anything when we're looking at and we're considering and we're looking at certain situations? Is there any differences in terms of how we need to think about, or how we should think about, or how we should consider as we evaluate or look at those situations?
Well, when you really dive into force science, which is something that I have expertise in, the principles of force science are the principles of force science. What differs between what a citizen defender might be facing versus what law enforcement might be facing is the context, right? For example, for a civilian or citizen defender, our primary objective is to disengage. We want to disengage as quickly as possible, get out of there as quickly as possible. We want to preserve life, and then we want to become a good witness. Whereas when it comes to law enforcement, like they have, when there is a crime that's committed, they have an obligation, a legal obligation to pursue and detain. So that's going to change the strategy significantly in terms of what tactics are taking place and how those tactics are being prioritized. All right, but when it comes to the actual science of use of force, and it is a science. There's an art aspect to it as well, because this is the important thing I think that people need to understand, is that the variables in a use of force incident are unpredictable, they are fluid, and they are unrepeatable, and they are happening rapidly and violently in compressed time under extreme stress where the stakes are life and death,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's where it's sort of a Venn diagram where there's a little bit of overlap, but there's also some clear differences with what we're observing in a use of force incident. Does that make sense?
No. It makes total sense, and I guess that's the thing. The first part was the part that I think I really wanted folks to hear and understand is that understanding that law enforcement has a certain obligation, and some people want to say, well,
Yeah.
they should just let them go, or they should just do that, and it's like, well, no, because they have this obligation. At the same time,
Well, they don't. They
Right.
can't enforce the law. They can't enforce the
Exactly.
law if they don't.
Exactly. Well, and on the other end, you've got, when some people look at the civilian use of force, and some of the folks who happen to be what I'll call more pro supporters of the Second Amendment are like, well, he should be able to do this or do that, and it's like, well, no, you have to understand, he's not law enforcement.
No.
It's not that's not his job. His
Here's
or her
happened.
job.
Here's what's happened. You're in California, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I was in LA for 10 years. Another part of my past, I worked in Hollywood for 10 years. I was a writer, producer, director, and on-camera talent for 10 years. On top of this, right, sort of how I fell into it, what I'm doing now. But the populace has been trained by Hollywood to think that we can do things that are not realistic. One of the notes I actually have written down here right in front of me, I'll read it right out loud. It says, "It's time for us as a society to start having a more realistic expectation of human performance in compressed time under extreme stress," right?
Right.
Where the stakes are life and death. I'm a person who has dedicated his life to his craft. I train 50, 60 hours a week with both hands-free skills and firearm skills and integration. And I'm either training people or training myself every single day of the week. And I've been doing this for a long time. And I don't think that people understand just how dangerous these situations are in reality in terms of the mitigation of probabilities. Well, the guy had a knife in his hand and he turned around and he's going away. So the police officer should have just tackled him to the ground and taken the knife away.
Right.
My God. Like, you know how chaotic and violent those situations are. There's an edged weapon in play that can cut you to the bone and you can bleed out in 40 seconds, no matter how skilled you are.
Right.
You know, my coach's name is Greg Nelson. He may be the most prolific martial artist alive, 4th degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just one discipline, 3 UFC world champions. He's highly, highly respected around the world. And if you asked him, would you go to the ground with someone with a knife? He would say, and he teaches special forces, by the way. He's a consultant for the U.S. military special forces. He would say, absolutely not. There is no way, because the chances are just too high for me to lose my life, and also for somebody else to lose their life. Right. So the whole idea is really revolves around the mitigation of probabilities. I think people think that they're these sort of absolutes, but it's just not. That's just not reality.
Well, yeah, and once again, when you talked about being trained by Hollywood, and you. The California legislature literally governs by Hollywood. That's where they receive, things like smart guns and stuff like that. But that's how they govern, and that's how they look at all these situations. Like, why doesn't he just shoot him in the shoulder or shoot the gun out of his hand?
One, that's still lethal force.
Right.
And the odds of the law, that's still lethal force, right?
Right.
But two, the probability of that being an effective enough modality to alter their behavior is significantly less, right? Oh, yeah. It's significantly less in it, right? So we could drill into that all we wanted to, but it's just the research has just shown over the years that it's just ineffective. I'm going to say something that's controversial, but I think it needs to be said because I don't hear it said often enough. Okay, the public isn't understanding the psychology of the psychopath and the sociopath, who is incapable of empathy. They don't care what happens to anybody else, and oftentimes they don't care what happens to them. The only thing, and they perceive kindness as weakness, and they're masters of exploitation. The public needs to understand this. This isn't me making this up. This is actual, right? This is the science of psychology here, right? All they understand is strength and weakness, and oftentimes the only effective deterrent is the possibility of lethality.
Right.
So just for law enforcement or for a citizen defender to have that option to alter their behavior in a way that could possibly create a mortal outcome for them is, the research shows, is really an amazing broadband deterrent to violence, right? And I know a lot of people don't like to talk about that or touch it, but those are the facts.
Right. For lack of a better term, mutually assured destruction. But yeah, no. Sometimes you have to have that. Just like, I always liken it to spanking. You don't have to spank every kid. Not every child needs to be spanked. But guess what? There are some kids who need that as a threat, who need that as a possibility, because that's just, that's something that will get them to comply and or to be obedient. So, we're just, a lot of us are just big kids. But I think that it's important for you to point that out, because people just don't understand that going into these situations, no one goes into a use of force situation. At least I want to believe no one goes into it with the idea that they want to kill somebody. In fact, most 99.9% of the time, I believe they went into it not even knowing that it was going to happen. It is literally spur of the moment.
I think a lot of people also, bringing up the whole Hollywood thing, they think that violent crime is oftentimes sort of a duel, right? Where there's this sort of symmetrical duel happening. And in the training world too, it's one of my criticisms of the training world, because they'll train people in this way, where they sort of train people for this duel that happens at high noon, like who's the fastest gun in the West, right? And in reality, it's asymmetrical. The overwhelming majority of violent crime is happens in a way that is unexpected, where it's being imposed, and the distances that these interactions are taking place at, the overwhelming majority of the time, are taking place at contact distance. So it isn't, no, people they don't know, they don't see it coming, and it's something that's being imposed onto them against their will, right? That's the difference between force and violence. In violence, there's a victim.
Right.
So good people use force as a countermeasure to, right? Force is victimless. So we teach people the appropriate level of force as a countermeasure to violence.
Okay. Right. So now, when law enforcement, for example, if someone's going to investigate or going to look into these situations, like every time I look at one of these, there's certain things that I'm like, okay, I see what I see. It either looks good or it looks bad. This is what it seems like. What are some of the things that the information or the data points that are going to come later, that we're going to find later? What are some of those things that we need to wait and hear and look for in order to better inform our perspective?
Well, there's a lot. There's a lot, and I can only just touch on a few, right? So bear with me. I can't say it all. Right? But first thing is, like, what was the context? What's the totality of the context? What are the circumstances? What happened before the fact? What was happening before video started to roll? Right? What that interaction was is a big part. It's a big part of the story. Okay. The next thing that's important to understand is that, contrary to what people think, there's this sort of myth out there that says video never lies, and I'll just say completely untrue. Video can be unbelievably deceptive. There are many factors that go into videos that you see of force incidents that people don't even consider or think of. I'll just sort of off the top of my head. Do you have something you want to add to that, Craig?
I was just going to say, being involved in film and stuff like that. I'm probably not nowhere near as involved as you were, but I recognize, first of all, how much work, energy, and effort it takes. How much work it takes to make things seem natural. And so, but I also know that, once again, how video can lie. Sometimes you can make it lie, and sometimes it can be intentional. But then on top of that, then there's just the idea that you literally are stuck with whatever's in that frame at the time it's in that frame and what you can hear at that point. All of the other stuff, all of the other context, goes back to your point of context, is gone, is missing.
Absolutely correct. The first thing I was going to say was, what type of lens is it? What angle lens is it? Is it a broad? Is it a wide angle lens? Right? Is it not? That will make a big difference in terms of what the perception is, what the distances are. You might think that person or police officer was 10, 20 feet away, when in reality they weren't. They were 3 to 5 feet away. It only takes an average person 1.47 seconds to traverse a distance of 21 feet. People dramatically underestimate just how quickly these things happen. They don't understand other factors are a huge factor is reactionary gaps. How many other people are in the environment? What are the attributes and the disparity in force between one person and the other? The audio. Right? Is there audio that's attached to it? Right? What's the distortion in the audio? Right? Mm-hmm. What is just in terms of the picture that you're seeing? What is the contrast? What are the lighting conditions? Mm-hmm. Man, there are so many pieces of evidence and factors that go into making an accurate. Like, we could go on for years on the show, literally, about what are all the different pieces that go into it that end up drawing us to an objective conclusion, right? Where we're not, a lot of people get confused and they think that I'm taking sides on these things. Right. Yeah. And I say, I'm not taking sides. Right. I'm not. I'm a person who trains law enforcement. Right. But I'm also a person who has been critical of law enforcement training over the years. So like, oh, you're anti-cop, and then they'll hear me say something about a use of force incident, and they'll say, oh, or that I'm not for defunding the police, and they'll say, oh, you're pro-cop. I'm like, no, I'm not on anybody's side. I'm on the side of the truth, and I'm on the side of justice. I'm on the side of evidence. I want to be an objectivist and take a look at what does the evidence suggest. not
Right.
what does my subjective, right, lens or point of view say. I don't have an
I
agenda. That's not justice.
it's funny you say that because that's I mean I cannot tell you the number of times I've gotten in arguments with people because they say, oh, if you side with the cops, well you're just a bootlicker, or then they'll say, well you just hate, you're anti-cop, and I'm like, no, saying that you want to wait till all the information comes in, because
Yeah.
if you only make it based on half the information, then you're not making a fully informed decision.
How,
I'm like,
how many
how
times
about
have
waiting
we
till the toxicology comes in, right?
totally all of it,
Right,
all of it. There's
right,
more. There's other factors that you just
right.
mentioned right there, right? There's more, right? Like here's just another example, just a generalized example. Okay, how many times have we seen a trial on court TV or something, right? And we hear one side, examining or cross-examining. We say, "Oh, that guy did it. That guy couldn't be more guilty. Like, string him up now." And then there's a cross-examination. You're like, "There's no way that guy did it." Like within minutes, we changed
Right,
our mind
right.
because
Because
we weren't taking into consideration the totality of the circumstance from an objective point of view. We were being influenced by one side.
no, exactly. Like, just a couple of other instances. What is department policy? What's the training that the officer received? Were they was what they did were their actions consistent with policy and consistent with their training? I while I am not
Yes.
while I'm not a guy who necessarily believes in quote unquote, I don't believe in victim shaming when it comes to people's criminal records, but I believe when officers on the way to a call, if they know who the suspect is and they have the ability to look up their criminal record, they
Yeah.
understand the context of who this individual is. If this individual has
Yes.
a record of utilizing firearms, if they have a record of violence, then that is going to inform how they deal with that particular situation.
They have to. They have to because they're human beings. They want to go home to their families at night, and I mean, it's just such a complex issue. I think one of the things that people don't understand is that police officers they're about the only profession. There may be some exceptions to this, but police officers can be charged criminally for doing their job. I think that most people think that police officers have this sort of automatic free pass to go out, to go and just commit murder and crime. But in reality, like the odds are stacked against them. They're put in very, very difficult situations, oftentimes where there is no good choice, where they have to make the least bad choice, and they're literally risking everything to do their job. I can't think of too many other professions where just going out to do your job, you can be charged criminally. Right? They aren't just getting a slap on the wrist, right? Like they can literally go to prison for a misunderstanding in absolute chaos. Do you mind if I just I put out a video last week just talking about, this is an abbreviated version of the video. I'm kind of a data freak, you might know,
Mm-hmm.
but here's an abbreviation of the video that I put out last week where I was talking about Force Institute cites a study from 2018 citing that there are, when it comes to police interactions, the statistics show 3.5 deaths per every 10 million interactions.
Wow, 3.5 per 10 million.
0.5 deaths per every 10 million law enforcement public interactions. That is a 0.00008 percentage of the time. Now, to put that into perspective, 5.9 million people visit the Grand Canyon every year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And of those 5.9 million visitors of the Grand Canyon, 5 people accidentally fall to their death. So in a lot of ways, this is just right. So this is just sheer numbers. That's the average number of annual interactions in the United States with law enforcement is almost 11 million, 10.9.
Right.
So 5 million fewer interactions than people who visit the Grand Canyon. So what you're talking about is twice as many people who visit the Grand Canyon fall to their death than die from interactions with law enforcement. Out of those 9 million interactions with the public, only 9,006 result in use of force.
Wow.
So then, if we're just taking a look at the raw data, letting that tell the story, if we're talking about law enforcement, the numbers are astronomically low.
I will. It's funny you say that, because that's, without getting into debating Black Lives Matter, one of the biggest challenges I have with the movement in terms of the quote unquote calling it an epidemic is the fact is that, once again, law enforcement use of force is, first of all, it not only is it low, but it's way down. I mean, it's gone down significantly. And when you specifically look at use of force with black males, once again, not only is it very, very small, but it's down significantly. And it's frustrating because we want to have this cultural conversation, but one side doesn't want to be honest about the facts.
No, they don't. And a lot of people are afraid to talk about the raw evidence because they're afraid of being labeled as a bigot or a racist, right? My opinion is that what's happening is the public is being intentionally mass gaslit so that no matter what they say, it's going to be considered wrong and incorrect. And this is a war on reason. That's what's happening right now. Western civilization has been founded on objectivism and justice, and objectivism has always been blind and been taught to make our decisions based on the evidence. It's kind of like what Dr. King said, right? We're gonna make our judgments on human beings based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin.
Right.
Again, another core sort of principle or tenet of Western civilization. And in order for this sort of neo-Marxist revolution to take root, they have to attack the underpinnings of some of those core values of Western civilization.
Oh no, I completely agree. Now, one thing that I wanted to touch on before we close out was, once again, and you see people who they see these videos, in particular when they see civilian use of force, and they're like, oh yeah, good for him, and he should have done this or he should have done that. And the one thing I always want to let folks know and remind folks, look, when you go through one of these, whether you are completely in the right or completely in the wrong or somewhere there in the middle, this is a life-altering event. And when I say life-altering, it's not going to be life-altering for the better.
No, the financial impact can be devastating. We have to remember, you may never be charged, but that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a civil case, right? Not to mention the psychological and emotional, the psychological and emotional implications can be devastating for life. There have been many cases throughout history where people were involved in a use of force incident where they were justified, and they were so traumatized by the event that they ended up taking their own life, or tumble down in a spiral of drug abuse or alcohol abuse or worse, right?
Right.
Then there's the spiritual implications. As well. So I really don't think that I'll say confidently, because I train people almost every day of the week, and I have for years. So I have a really large sample size, right? Mm-hmm. I really don't think that people grasp the weight and the complexity of these events. I don't think they're even close. I think they find out in a hurry, with the right kind of training, they find out in a hurry what reality is.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So do me a favor. Let folks know, before we close out, let folks know, the type of services that you provide and how they can get in contact with you if they want to just follow the work you're doing, follow your video work, or maybe.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate that. So the name of my of my business is called Integrative Defense Strategies, where we take a really holistic approach toward training. We're not just gun centric, and we're not just hands-free centric, and we're not just decision making. And we don't have these modalities in silos. We have all these modalities blended together so that they are adaptable and interdependent upon one another. We take a very cutting edge approach toward training because of my background in skill acquisition and human performance. We take a very unique and what we think is a highly effective approach toward training. The name of the business is Integrative Defense Strategies. Please check out our YouTube channel. We put out a lot of informational, educational material on there. Also, Facebook is sort of the hub of our business, and again, Integrative Defense Strategies. You can see my work also. I'm a regular contributor on Personal Defense Network. I have a playlist. I'm a regular contributor on Funker Tactical, Aperture Fight Focus, and then our website is www.thisids.com. I'd be honored if you guys would check us out, and hopefully we can help usher in some positive change.
All right. Todd, once again, thank you so very much. Really enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you, Craig.
We'll have to have you back on sometime soon.
It was an honor to be here. Thanks a lot for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Todd Fossey from Integrative Defense Strategies. All right, folks. Well, hey, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. We very much appreciate you guys tuning in. We appreciate you liking and sharing the program and telling your friends about the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.